Hello and welcome to the latest in the series of Cityforum podcasts. I'm Professor Paul Cornish, Chief Strategist at Cityforum Public Policy, and the title of today's discussion is Regenerating and Sustaining the UK's Land Industrial Capability as a Strategic Asset for the Nation and Our Allies. And today I'm in conversation with Colin McClean, Managing Director of Rheinmetall BAE Systems Land, otherwise known as RBSL. Colin, first of all, thanks very much for this opportunity. I look forward to a good chat with you. I suppose the first question or the first point we should cover is why exactly are we having this conversation in the first place? And I guess the general context must be Ukraine, very general context. I think we've all become very familiar with what I describe as a rather tired old argument about the end of the tank and the end of heavy armour and so on. And World War II was 50 years ago, whatever it was, 60 years. But it's probably fair to say that what Ukraine has shown is that while modern warfare is all sorts of things, it's digital, it's drone-based, it's informational, and all these sorts of things that we're all aware of, it seems to me that it's shown that there is also still a role for heavy armour. So I suppose that's my first question for you. Do you think, what's your view of what the Ukraine war is teaching us about conduct of warfare? And, from your position at RBSL, is there a sense that this is somehow a step change for what RBSL does, or what's your general impression?
Paul, firstly, let me say thank you very much for this opportunity and thank you for being here in Telford. We're very proud of what we're doing here, what we're striving to do here, and we like to share it with people, so thank you for being part of our journey. In terms of what we do here in the context of Ukraine, I guess it's for the MOD and the British Army and those that operate in those spheres to decide how they will fight, what the nature and character of conflict will be in the future, and therefore what doctrine and what equipment they need. From our perspective, we view that as long as soldiers need to move, survive, potentially deliver lethal force, have situation awareness, make decisions, we can provide platforms that will enable them to do that and be successful in whatever missions the nation requires them to take part in, and also to have the greatest chance of coming home safe after those missions. That's why we believe what we do here has always been relevant, remains relevant, and maybe Ukraine is just a great and timely reminder that it is relevant. But certainly the people that I work alongside here, they would probably say they've always known it's relevant.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I mean, nobody's suggesting this is a return to World War II and, massive tank formations rolling across Central and Eastern Europe and the North German Plain and so on. But it's quite plain, isn't it, that heavy armour, we're talking about tanks and personnel vehicles and artillery and so on, all of this, it's still relevant, it's still being used.
It absolutely is, but maybe there's an opportunity to highlight it's also slightly different. So I know that many people will look at a picture of Challenger 3 and think that looks remarkably like Challenger 2. And I could highlight many differences, but let me highlight what I think is actually the greatest difference between Challenger 3 and Challenger 2. And it's a thing called the digital architecture in the turret, which people don't actually see. Challenger 3 is the first digital tank that the British Army will have. And what that means is that the crew members of that tank are able to integrate not just with the other land capabilities around them, be they dismounted soldiers, be they uncrewed ground vehicles, be they uncrewed air vehicles. They will have access through their digital capability, through their digital turret, to all that information. And so you start to realize buzzwords like any shooter, any sensor, people being able to operate as part of a true network, the F-35 is on the same network as the Challenger 3 tank. So that's why they might look remarkably similar. That, for me, is actually the greatest difference between Challenger 2 and Challenger 3, albeit I can tell you about smoothbore guns and things as well, but no, it's the digital architecture in the turret that makes it a real step change in capability for the British Army.
That's really interesting. Thanks, Colin. Let's move on a tiny bit, because the other reason we're having this conversation is, of course, because you very kindly invited me to come to this Boxer and Challenger 3 factory, essentially, here in Telford. And it's a pleasure to be here. But what we're going to discuss today in the main is not really, I suppose, military capability as such, but they're much broader. And I suppose over decades, it's also been, in many ways, a much more contentious subject of land industrial capability in the UK. That sounds a bit clunky, but I think that's really what we're getting at. So let's get into that. But before we do, can I just try and pick up a few more basic details about what it is we're talking about? You've just been talking about Challenger 3, but what are these two vehicles, Boxer and Challenger 3? One is a wheeled vehicle, one is a tracked vehicle, a tank. But what are they basically? Why do we need them? What can they do? When are they going to come into service? How many will there be? Will we be selling them all over the world? And all these sorts of basic details. We're really interested to hear some of that before we go into the land industrial side of things.
Well, let me start with Boxer, because Boxer, we had a historic milestone for Boxer just last month, when on the 27th of March, we started the manufacture of the first UK Boxer that will be made here in RBSL. And so that production line is now running. And what that will mean is we will, in the fullness of time, start to then deliver these Boxers to the British Army. And the Boxer is, bar none, the best 8x8 armoured personnel carrier in the world. It will allow the British Army to manoeuvre on the battlefield with up to 8 dismounted soldiers and a crew of 3 who can remain with the Boxer. It will allow those soldiers to be protected in, again, a vehicle that offers unsurpassed levels of survivability. And it will allow those soldiers to carry with them the mission systems, the mission equipment that they need for whatever mission it is they are required to undertake. One of the unique things about the Boxer is its modularity. And what that means is the Boxer is actually constructed in, simplistically, 2 halves. A drive module, which is generic, all drive modules are the same, and then mission modules, which quite literally you can lift off, you can disconnect and lift off from the drive module, and you can replace with a different mission module dependent upon the mission. So, for example, an ambulance mission module has in the back of it a pretty sophisticated casualty evacuation and sort of small surgical facility. That mission module can be lifted off and be replaced by a command and control module, which would house all your command and control networks for a divisional headquarters. So that modularity is a huge asset for the Boxer. And maybe the last thing that I'll highlight is, in a slightly different dimension, if you will, Boxer's also in service with a number of our principal allies. So, it's been in service with the German army, with the Dutch army. It is now in service with the Lithuanian army and with the Australian army. So we're joining a club, and that will offer opportunities of interoperability, shared training opportunities, and frankly, potentially draw those armies who are allies to us closer together. So from a equipment point of view, it becomes a vehicle, if you'll excuse the pun, to help us be stronger together with our allies.
So just a quick question on Boxer before we come to Challenger 3 again. So essentially what we're doing here in Telford is making our own copies of the vehicle, the same vehicle that other countries have, but we're making our own here. That's the idea?
That is absolutely right. Inevitably, there are a few specific UK mission fits, communication systems, weapon storage systems that will be right for our weapon storage and all the rest of it. But if you were to look at a German Boxer and a British Boxer, you would essentially be looking at the same vehicle, which is wonderful from an interoperability point of view.
And on Challenger 3, you talked about the digital tank, which is, I must say, fascinating to hear. And you touched on very briefly on the gun, the gun, and anything else that we need to know about Challenger 3 at this stage.
Yeah, let me just. The UK, for a number of good historical reasons, traditionally has had a rifled barrel in its tank guns, but technology has moved on, and the world standard is for smoothbore tank barrels for capability reasons, and the UK is now going to join that smoothbore club with a 120mm smoothbore gun in its tank, which again gives common ammunition suites and opportunity for shared stockpiles and for next generation ammunition, potentially working together with allies for those next generation capabilities and sharing the cost of those developments as inevitably they are. And the L55A1, which is the smoothbore gun that's going into Challenger, is, again, bar none, the best smoothbore gun in the world. And in service today with the Leopard A7 tank, well proven. And I know our UK soldiers, because we've had some of them here, are delighted to be having that capability in their armament. And I guess that gives the tank that element of what we used to refer to as the Holy Trinity. That gives it the lethality aspect to the tank. But there is more than that. There is that digital architecture that I talked about, which gives it many facets. Survivability, one of the other legs of the Trinity. Challenger 3 will have a new survivability suite, and it is a suite. At its heart is the Epsom armour that has been developed here in RBSL, but in lockstep with the likes of DSTL, and that armour has been developed and will be fitted to the tank, and will give the tank unprecedented levels of survivability. And of course, then you have the ability, enabled by the likes of the electronic architecture, to integrate the likes of active protection systems, should you so wish. So that's another key part of the Challenger capability. And then the sighting system, both gunner and commander, gives the Challenger 3 system a hunter-killer capability, 24 hours, all-weather capability. And we've got a great sighting system that comes out of Thales up in Glasgow, who have got a great heritage of provision of sights for the British Army over the years. So I guess that sort of maybe sums up what Challenger 3 will bring our armoured soldiers for the future.
Thank you very much. Colin, your point about ammunition made me think about the recent announcements to do with defence budgeting in the UK. Presumably, common ammunition or an ammunition requirement that is common to our allies, indeed, would help us with all these awkward problems of ammunition stockpiles and supply chain and so on, because we would have access to.
Absolutely. I mean, there are so many benefits, aren't there, just in terms of sharing industrial capacity, sharing stockpiles, having access to each other's technology, that burden sharing of next generation developments, anything that one nation learns, they can share with the partner nations. I used to reflect that, it gets lonely in a club of one. We are joining a big club in which many of our allies are a part. So I think from an ammunition point of view, that's a great place to be.
I suppose my next question is slightly naive, really. You've explained what both Boxer can do. It's an APC, and I'm a personnel carrier with all sorts of variants, a modular version, a modular vehicle. And I've looked around and seen and understood the briefings about it. It is quite fascinating to imagine what can be done on this common chassis. And Challenger 3 is a tank, but it's more than a tank. It's a digitally network tank, and also I can understand all of that. But I suppose my slightly naive question is why do we need these things? And now, in a sense, we've already had the first part of the answer to that question because we were talking about Ukraine and the fact that armoured warfare has not yet disappeared. Maybe it will do one day, but it certainly hasn't yet. But don't we already have these? Don't we already have tanks and APCs and armoured vehicles and so on? Why do we, at this moment in history, need to be going through this phase?
Maybe you give me the opportunity to highlight the amazing heritage in the UK in this particular domain. So the water tanks for Mesopotamia, the first tanks that were created in 1915, 1916, come out of the antecedent companies of RBSL. Alvis, Vickers, GKN, these are the companies that brought us the fighting vehicle 432, now known as the Bulldog. These are the companies that brought us Warrior. These are the companies that brought us CVRT. These are the companies that brought us AS90. And that heritage is unprecedented, frankly, around the world. And we should celebrate that history. But what Challenger and Boxer allow is that great legacy now has a future. And the people that designed Challenger 2 are now employed within RBSL. And frankly, many of those people want to do just two things. The first thing is they want to deliver Challenger 3 as their last contribution. And for many of these people, it's worth highlighting, this has been a lifetime contribution. I have people in this business who have been working in RBSL or its predecessor companies for 50 years. And they want to do one more. And they also want to pass that knowledge on to the next generation. So there is literally nothing that makes me smile more when I walk past the engineering desks where I see one of these old, and they do tend to be gentlemen, stood beside a much younger engineer who come from a much more diverse background, passing on that knowledge. And that is potentially one of the most important things that Challenger 3 will give this nation, not just the tank itself, but the fact that it has been the vehicle to pass that knowledge on to the next generation, who will deliver the modifications, the updates, the upgrades to Challenger 3, and then whatever comes next.
Can I, just before we come on to, this is fascinating, can I just also pin you down on entry into service for both Boxer and Challenger 3? And how many is the UK going to be buying? Will we be selling these to other countries, or overall, what's the master plan? When do we get them, and how many, and so on?
Forgive me if I talk in slightly vague terms, because it really is for the British Army to give the specifics in whichever way they wish. But for example, we here in RBSL will deliver our first Boxer by the 31st of March 2024. And at that stage, they start flowing off the production line. And I should highlight also that we will be doing that in partnership with a sister company, WFEL, up in Stockport, not part of my group, but we work literally hand in hand. The managing director up there, Ian Anderton, is a great chap, and his team are doing equally as good a job on their Boxer. So as I deliver my first Boxer, Ian will be delivering his, and they will then flow into the British Army from 2024. And indeed, the British Army is already, almost as we speak, putting its hands on the first prototype vehicles so that it can do its own testing and indeed experimentation with those vehicles. So Boxer is, you can literally almost taste it. It's coming, and it's coming very soon.
We'll have how many of those in the end? Sorry.
So I'll say over 600. The exact number again I'll leave for the MOD to confirm. But over 600, and there could well be more. Because of that modularity that we've talked about. If there are other mission systems that the British Army wished to deploy onto the battlefield, Boxer could well be the platform to do that on, and all the logistics benefits that would offer with a reduced number of fleets on the battlefield and the reduced logistics tail that then benefits from.
And sorry, the other question was export sales. Is there a plan for export? I suppose it's not really part of the picture since other countries are already making them. Or
so let me reflect. From this factory here in Telford, exports have flown out, have gone out to again partner nations. So, for example, the British Army's Warrior vehicles were built here, as were what we refer to as Desert Warrior, the warriors that remain in service with our allies in Kuwait at the moment. But it's fair to say that the UK land sector has got out of the habit of exporting land platforms. Boxer certainly offers us opportunities to do that because we've highlighted a number of nations that already have Boxer, but there are many others who have seen the utility of this type of armoured personnel carrier, a wheeled personnel carrier, which the technology allows it to go, frankly, where only tracks used to be able to go. Now wheeled vehicles can go, thanks to technologies such as central tyre inflation systems and upgraded suspension systems, greater powertrains and the like. Other nations have seen that, other nations are interested in it, and if they're a partner nation to the UK, they may choose to buy Boxer, and they may choose to buy Boxer from the UK. And that would be good, clearly from an industrial point of view and from a national prosperity point of view, but also from a interoperability point of view for the British Army.
Super, thanks. I think that really puts us in the picture very clearly for both these vehicles, Boxer and Challenger 3. So if we can turn now to the bigger picture of, as I described at the beginning, of land industrial capability as opposed to military capability. Of course, the two things are very closely related. They have to be. And I suppose my first question really was to do with, why is all of this so significant? And you more than answered that really when you were talking about the UK's very rich heritage in this area. You mentioned the water tanks heading for Mesopotamia, and of course, one or two of our listeners, maybe only one or two, might not know that the word tank was essentially a code word, and they looked a bit like water tanks, and so that's how they were described, and that was well over 100 years ago. So I completely agree. We've been at this for a long time. But I suppose that then throws up another question in my mind, which is, I suppose what's gone wrong? Why are we having all this? Why are we having this conversation about a land industrial capability in an area that we've been at for over a century?
Let me maybe reflect on a point you you reflected about military capability, industrial capability, and then said they are related. And I'd just like to doubly emphasize that point. I think a it would be I would be overstating my place if I were to say, we here at RBSL feel that we're part of the British Army. But it's quite close. We genuinely feel that we are part of the same enterprise. And I do think that industrial capability and military capability are absolutely intertwined. And I think if you look at my sister domains, by which I mean most easily the maritime domain and the air domain, the relationship between industry and military is absolutely intertwined. And maybe in the land environment, maybe we became guilty of taking it for granted and just assuming there would be a tank factory there when we needed one, and when we needed one we'd be able to sort of turn on the lights pretty quickly, and the tanks would soon start flowing out. And now that we've reflected on that, I think the realization is that that's not the case. You can't just turn the lights back on, expect it to be there. You can't expect the physical infrastructure just to be there, but maybe most importantly, you can't expect the experts, and they are experts, and I am blessed here. I get surprised and frankly mesmerized every day by the knowledge that my people have, and it reminds me that knowledge is not something. Yes, it starts maybe with a university degree in engineering or in metallurgy or in software programming, but it then has to be nurtured and used and experimented, and the hard lessons of it learned. And I would encourage us all not to take for granted that will just be there when you need it, because my experience is it takes a lot of nurturing, and if we lose it, and frankly as a nation maybe we came perilously close to losing it, and this is part of the nation not losing it. So I would hope that we will have caught it just in time, and the lesson will stick with us.
So that's essentially, in terms of this big land industrial capability question, if I've understood correctly, that's really what Boxer and Challenger 3 represent. It is just showing that we've still got it.
We have still got it, and though I think those two projects have allowed us potentially not to lose it, because there had been a period of decline, and it's only with projects like that you get the opportunity to arrest that decline. And maybe to try and bring that to life, I've talked about the people skills, but even in the physical hardware that's required, there had been considerable disinvestment in this factory, and we have had to put that disinvestment right. But that comes at a cost, and we have had to spend considerable money in order to have the physical infrastructure to deliver the Boxer and the Challenger. And I know that goes right the way through the supply chain as well here in the UK. So it's not, I wouldn't want this to in any way just be about RBSL, because we are only as good as our supply chain and the people in industry that we partner with to deliver these things, and they are feeling exactly the same. This has been their opportunity to reinvest, give their engineers the next challenge to get their teeth into, to reinvest in tooling on the shop floor and to deliver some amazing equipment.
I'll come to that in a sec if I could, to pick those points up about the people and processes and supply chain and so on. But just to finish off I suppose the point about what is happening here in terms of industrial capability and production. You showed me around both areas, the Boxer area and the Challenger 3 area earlier today. Fascinating. We had a really good walk around, I thought. But I was struck that it's an obvious point to make, so forgive me for that, Colin, but it just struck me that this isn't just about building things, making things. It's also about, and you kept stressing it as we walked around, it's also about maintaining the capability, both military, obviously, and industrial, through updates and upgrades and basically sustainability. Could you comment on that? How important is that side? So you're not just producing a Boxer and sending it out of the door to the client. You're also involved in through life support.
Absolutely, and inevitably the day of delivery of the first Boxer will be a big day, and we should celebrate it. But maybe, to misquote Churchill, I think, at best that's just the end of the beginning. The main story is, of course, when the vehicle is not when it's in this factory, but when it's in the hands of British soldiers. And we all live in a world where what was good a year ago is not necessarily good enough for today. Technology is moving at a pace. So those wonderful Boxers, and they will be wonderful Boxers that are delivered on day one to the British soldier, if we don't then continually update them and upgrade them, in 5 years' time, they will not be giving those British soldiers the competitive edge of technology that they need against their adversaries. And so we absolutely must, in my view, keep updating, keep upgrading them in a agile, drumbeat way. It doesn't have to be huge updates at any one time, but it's just a steady drip, 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 drip of capability. Again, I see this when I go to, for example, RAF Coningsby, and I walk around what they do in maintaining the Typhoon aircraft there, but not just maintaining them, continually inserting the latest software, continually updating it so that every mission that's flown has got the best capability that technology can provide at that particular time. So I think it's a hugely important part of what we can offer the British soldier, not just on day one, but frankly for the whole life of that vehicle. And maybe, forgive me for going on, we may not know for certain the life of the vehicle in service, but 30, 40, even 50, even 60 years is not untypical for the life of an armoured fighting vehicle in service. So that the thought that is not going to be continually updated and upgraded is makes no sense in the world that we live in today.
Can I go back to the a comment you made a few minutes ago about about people and other aspects of the production cycle, I suppose. Essentially, I suppose it's to say that, of course, this isn't just about welding steel together. Although, this morning you showed me where the steel comes in and where the welding happens, and there it was going on. All of that must be happening, but there's also, how can I put it? There are softer aspects to the manufacturing processes that you're building here for Boxer and Challenger, to the people essentially. But all the other processes and all the other mechanisms and tools that you're going to need to be able to do this. And the supply chain to back it up. So I wonder if you have any other thoughts on I called it clumsily the soft side of things. In other words, all the things that surround the process of producing an armoured vehicle, and particularly I'd be interested in your outreach, I suppose, in to the broader science and technology world. You'll know better than I do that this is a very live issue in the UK at the moment. It has been for some period. And there's also another live issue is STEM teaching in schools and so on. So is that part of your remit too?
It's absolutely part of our remit. How much of it is formally imposed upon us? Almost nothing, actually, but we absolutely believe it is part of our remit. So let me try and bring that to life. What does it look like? Well, coincidentally, it looks like the 40 RAF air cadets who are on a tour of the facility today. They're local to the community. Somebody who works in the business knows somebody who's in that organisation and engaged with us, and we thought absolutely that's what we should be doing as part of our engagement to the local community. We run a wonderful apprentice scheme, and another thing that will never cease to bring a smile to your face on a busy day is when you bump into one of these young apprentices that they potentially do a 2, a 3 or a 4 year apprenticeship with us, depending on what particular discipline they're on. And they bring so much passion, so much energy, and so much, frankly, both diversity of thought, but also great skills. Because when we're on the welding line, there might be a slightly older demographic. When we move into the systems integration facility, we tend to bump into a lot of youngsters who are busy programming hand controllers for Challenger 3s, and they know all about these things because they are, quote unquote, that PlayStation generation, and they live in that world. And so they are bringing not just great energy and passion to the business, but also amazing skills. So that's a hugely important part of what we're doing here. And almost 50% of my workforce are engineers by training, degree level training and beyond, and that's real high value employment. This isn't low value stuff. Very little of what we do here is sort of low value. It's all pretty high value stuff. And yes, we've moved between that. Welding, maybe one of the wonderful things about this environment is it does go from that super high tech, because it is. If I take the armor technology, that is world class. The welding, it's welding, but even that, my welders have now got more letters after their names than your average Cambridge professor. So they are as qualified as it comes, both here in the UK and in Germany. They are doubly qualified because we've had to get them accredited across all the German standards as well. So it is high. Even welding is pretty high tech stuff.
Mm. Yeah, super. Can I move on then? Let's get really soft now, which is a question about the culture. You're the boss. You're the managing director of RBSL, and here you are manufacturing or putting together, assembling, a tank and an armed personnel carrier. And so this is a question about what sort of industrial culture are you trying to inculcate here? I was struck as we walked around. You have banners. One of them is respect. I think three banners. Is that right? Respect and 2 other slogans. And the cynic in me said, "Oh yeah, this is just another load of this sort of corporate sloganeering that really doesn't mean very much." But I'm not trying to, as they say, blow smoke. But then I thought, hang on a minute, there's something going on here. A very down to earth atmosphere. Everybody very friendly. We were walking around and you'd meet someone who'd say, morning, and by the way, the widget I'm waiting for hasn't arrived yet, and so on. So there was that freedom to say from the shop floor that things aren't quite right yet, and so on, whatever, which, as far as I could see, you were interested in and responding to. So very friendly, very highly expert people all moving around together, and including, of course, one, I won't mention his name, who'd actually served in the same regiment as me in the 1980s. So that really was a proof of quality. But my question is that what you're trying to do here, to produce a rather flat culture, a very, easygoing, grounded culture, both nationally here in Telford and internationally, because with all your collaborators overseas?
Yeah, well, thank you for the observation, by the way, because that's good feedback. Let me start by observing the amazing opportunity that we have as a business, because although we have that amazing heritage that I've talked about, we're almost at the same time a bit of a startup, because the joint venture itself came into being just less than 4 years ago, and since the joint venture was formed, we've doubled in size, and therefore there are now more people in the business who know only RBSL. They don't know the antecedent companies and the cultures that may have gone beyond them. And so what we say to everybody when they join the company as part of their induction is, you have an opportunity to shape this business. The concrete is not yet set in this business, and therefore when you you have a vote as you join this business. And so everybody is involved in an ongoing journey to create the culture, not that I want, but what the business wants. And that is happening on a day-to-day basis. And we're very lucky. We've got some amazing projects that people just love talking about and love to be part of. But that is building the culture of the business. And the values, those banners that you talked about, trust, transparency, and respect, those are the values that we settled on as inevitably as part of workshops and things that you do with people. And we then talk to people about, those are the values that should underpin our behaviours amongst ourselves as co-workers, but with our customer. These are values that should underpin how we deal with our customers, and indeed with other people in the supply chain. As a prime contractor, so for example in the Challenger 3 contract, I'm a prime contractor to the UK MOD. We believe that brings upon it certain responsibilities to those in the supply chain, because you are the conduit between the customer and those second, third, fourth tier suppliers. And we absolutely want them to be part of our team. And the strap line that, again, the team have come up with as part of this, if you like, culture work, is one team, one mission. And that's how we want this business to be. Not just how I want it to be, but how the people in the business want it to be.
Well, thanks. We're coming to the end of our time. I think we could talk for hours about this, and I'm sure you've got better things to do. But if we can finish with 3 really quick and easy questions. The first is that governments have always described the UK's defence industrial capability as being an asset, and a general asset to the economy. Obviously, an asset in terms of what it produces for the armed forces and so on. Is that the way you see what you're doing here in Telford as benefiting the UK economy, UK prosperity? Is that part of the picture as well?
Yeah, it absolutely is. So we actually tend to talk about 3 things when when people ask us what do we do here, as we have done today. We inevitably talk about we build tanks, but actually when you step to a higher level of what we actually do, we do 3 things. The first thing we do is we help British soldiers and their allies conduct the missions they have to carry out and come home safe. That's the first thing we actually do. The second thing then we're lucky enough to be part of is the enterprise that keeps the nation and our allies secure. And then the third thing that we are absolutely doing here is keeping our nation prosperous. And so the doubling in the size of this business in the last 3.5 years since the formation of the joint venture, is bringing jobs to local people and indeed people around the country. We have an office up in Newcastle, one down in Bristol, people employed down in Bovington. So there's a sort of national side to that. But again, if I can then come back to that supply chain as well. So, those people up in Thales producing the sites that will go into Challenger 3, that's jobs, skills, prosperity for the nation. So that is a huge part of what we do. And I'm very proud to be working with allies overseas, but I'm also very proud that British taxpayers' money is buying a piece of British equipment for British soldiers, and that supply chain value is going back into the UK economy. I don't think we should be we should be ashamed of that.
Completely agree. Second of my wind-up questions, another easy one. There was a repost of your announcement of the beginning of the Boxer manufacturing cycle on LinkedIn this morning, and I noticed as I was coming in. And I hope he doesn't mind me quoting him, but Alex Holmes from Kinetic, it was public, so I think I can quote it. It was online. He wrote this in a comment: Boxer is a great collaborative story of investment in defence and defence investing in the British economy. More procurement like this, please. End of quote. So the question is this, in very general terms, Colin, would you describe what you're doing here as a new way of doing things in defence manufacturing and UK procurement, or would you describe it as just an improvement on the way we've been doing things in the past? How is this evolutionary or revolutionary, I suppose you could put it that way?
I'm always I have a belief that those that went before us were probably better than we are. So I'm definitely not going to say that we are somehow doing anything better, but I do think we've got a good model here, and that model is about working in partnership with the customer. It is about looking to your UK industrial capability in the first instance for all the sovereign freedom of action that gives you, the prosperity it gives you, and frankly the passion to deliver for British soldiers that it gives you. I think there are lots of good things that could be the basis of how we do things in the future. Whether it's new or not, I'm sure those that went before would say, no, we were doing lots of this stuff too. But we've definitely got something that we should look to perpetuate from here on in, I think.
Thank you. Final question. What about the future? You said earlier on that this sort of facility, this sort of asset, what you're doing here in Telford, you can't just switch it on and off. It doesn't work that way. And you also talked about the drumbeat that we've heard a lot about in other areas of UK defence manufacturing, submarines, for example. It's the same point, isn't it? There's got to be a rhythm to this, otherwise you just lose it and it all goes out of tune and you can't reassemble it. So I suppose the last question is, what do you need from the future, or in the future, what do you see as that might be coming your way, and what do you hope for, actually?
I think I'll actually distill it down to one simple question that the nation needs to answer. Arguably, it's the British Army on behalf of the nation that needs to answer this question. And that is, do we want as a nation, as an army, this industrial capability to be part of our nation and part of our army? And if the answer to that question is yes, I genuinely believe that we can deliver it. If the answer to that question is no, we need to be honest that that's the answer, and be very honest about what the repercussions of that answer are. So I look forward to the nation and the British Army answering that question. They know, I think you would know from this discussion what I think the answer is, but that's not for me to say. But what I can absolutely say, that if the British Army wants RBSL to be here to, yes, deliver its challenges, yes, deliver its boxes, yes, to continually update and upgrade those capabilities throughout their life, and then deliver whatever the next thing needs to be as the nature and character of warfare evolve, and therefore the doctrine and what equipment is needed evolves, we will be there to do that for them.
Colin, thank you very much indeed. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you today, and thanks again for inviting me here and for a fascinating tour around the manufacturing and assembly facility here in Telford. I think we've covered a great deal of the detail that is always useful and always valuable to have. But I think we've also had a good look at the, if I can call it that, the big picture significance of what's going on here in Telford. So thank you very much indeed. It's been a pleasure, and I'm sure our listeners to the Cityforum podcast will be fascinated by what we've discussed. Thank you.